Hi, everybody. Sometimes a dream isn't just something we see when our eyes are closed. It's a whisper from the heart, gently reminding us of what we truly long for. Dream of a peaceful life? Will Lee turn it into a sweet proposal for Tusam? Is not just a question, but a journey through love, hope, and the quiet promises two souls make when the world around them feels uncertain. Tusam has always dreamed of a simple, peaceful life, one filled with laughter, morning sunlight, and the warmth of someone who truly understands her. Yet when Lee returns, carrying the weight of distance and time, the dream she once held close begins to stir again. Will his return bring the serenity she yearns for, or awaken the ache of a love that never faded? The morning sun poured through the small wooden window, touching through some space with its gentle warmth. The smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the scent of the garden, basil, jasmine, and the faint sweetness of ripe guava hanging from the backyard tree. Everything around her seemed calm, almost too calm, yet inside her heart, a silent storm was still waiting to rest. Tusam had dreamed of peace all her life. Not the kind of peace written in poems or shown in movies, but the kind that came with simple mornings, shared laughter, and the warmth of someone who would stay. For years, that someone had been Lee, the man whose smile had carried her through the darkest nights and whose promises had lingered in her mind like a lullaby she could never forget. He had gone away, to a place far from this quiet countryside, a place where danger breathed closer than hope. Before leaving, he had held her close and whispered, "When I return, we'll live the life we always dreamed of, just you and me." Those words were all she had left when the months turned to years and letters stopped coming. Every day, Tusam sat by the same window, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, eyes fixed on the horizon. The road beyond the fields was empty most days, only filled with wind and the shadows of clouds drifting lazily above. Still, she waited. She waited because the dream of a peaceful life with Lee by her side was the only thing keeping her heart alive. Then, one afternoon, when the rain had just stopped, she heard the sound of footsteps outside. Slow, steady, familiar. Her heart skipped a beat. For a second she thought her mind was playing tricks again, like all those times she imagined him standing by the gate. But when she turned, she froze. There he was. Lee. Thinner than before, his face tanned and marked by fatigue, but his eyes, those same deep, kind eyes, still held the warmth she had once fallen for. His voice broke the silence, trembling with both exhaustion and tenderness. "Tusam, I'm home." The cup fell from her hands, shattering into a dozen tiny pieces, but she didn't care. She ran to him, tears already blurring her vision. When she reached him, she stopped just long enough to whisper his name before collapsing into his arms. The world around them disappeared. Only their heartbeats remained, two rhythms that had been apart for too long, finally meeting again. That night the house felt alive again. The small lamp on the table glowed softly, casting shadows that danced gently on the walls. Tusam made him warm soup, though her hands shook while chopping the vegetables. She wanted to speak, to ask him everything, but every time she looked into his eyes, all she could do was smile through her tears. Lee watched her silently. There was something deep behind his gaze, something unspoken. The weight of battles fought, of promises he wasn't sure he could keep. But when she laughed softly, wiping her tears, it was as if the heaviness lifted for a moment. As the night deepened, Lee reached into his coat pocket. His fingers brushed against a small velvet box he had kept hidden through all the pain, all the miles. He didn't open it yet, not tonight. Instead, he just whispered, "Someday soon, I'll tell you everything, Tusam. I promise." And she nodded, her heart fluttering with a quiet hope, the same hope that had kept her waiting all these years. Outside, the rain started again, gentle and rhythmic. The world seemed to breathe along with them.
Two souls finding peace not in grand moments but in the small, fragile silence of love finally returned.
The days that followed felt like a dream that Tusam didn't dare to wake from. The once silent house now echoed with small, precious sounds. The creak of the front door opening at dawn, the gentle hum of Lee fixing the old wooden fence, and the occasional laughter that spilled through the garden when they shared breakfast under the bougainvillea tree. Lee was different now, quieter, more reserved, but there was a new tenderness in everything he did. He would wake up early to chop firewood before Tusam even stirred, and when she came outside, he'd already be waiting with a cup of warm milk for her. Sometimes he would just stand behind her in silence as she cooked, his presence both comforting and heartbreaking. It was as if he feared that if he blinked, she might vanish again. One evening, as the sun melted into the horizon, Tusam found him sitting by the river behind their home, staring at the water's reflection. His shirt sleeves were rolled up, and the wind played gently with his hair. She walked over quietly, bringing a small basket of rice cakes and fruit. "You haven't eaten all day," she said softly. Lee turned, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "I wasn't hungry. I was just thinking." "About what?" she asked, sitting beside him. He paused, eyes still fixed on the flowing current. "It's strange, isn't it, to come back to peace after living in chaos? I used to think I'd never see this place again. Never see you again." Tusam's heart clenched. She reached for his hand, her fingers trembling. "You're here now. That's all that matters." The wind carried their silence, wrapping them in a fragile calm. For a moment, Lee turned toward her, and the world seemed to hold its breath. His gaze softened. His thumb brushed her wrist gently. It was a touch that carried 1,000 unsaid things: regret, longing, and something deeper that he could no longer hide. But just as the words rose in his throat, a flicker of fear crossed his eyes. He looked away. He wasn't ready, not yet. That night, while Tusam slept, Lee sat alone by the window. Moonlight washed over his face, tracing the lines of weariness and quiet sorrow. From his pocket he took out the small velvet box once more, holding it tightly in his palm. Inside was a simple silver ring. Nothing fancy, but it carried a story. He had bought it months ago, during a moment of fleeting hope. A promise to himself that if he survived, he would return and give Tusam the peaceful life she deserved. Now that he was here, the ring felt heavier than before. Because peace, he realized, wasn't something you could promise. It was something you had to protect even from the ghosts that followed you home. Lee looked toward Tusam, sleeping, her face calm under the pale light. His heart ached with love. A love both strong and fragile, born from pain yet desperate for healing. He whispered softly, almost as if the night might hear him. "Someday soon, Tusam, I'll make it right. I'll give you that peaceful life, and maybe, if I'm brave enough, I'll finally ask you to be my wife." Outside, the night wind brushed against the window pane, carrying with it the scent of blooming jasmine, the same scent that once filled their youth. And for the first time in years, Lee allowed himself to believe that maybe dreams could still come true. Days turned into weeks, and life in the small countryside began to bloom with quiet joy. Tusam often noticed that Lee disappeared early in the morning and returned late in the afternoon, his clothes stained with dust, his hands rougher than before. When she asked where he went, he only smiled softly and said, "Just fixing something that was broken." In truth, Lee was building something behind the hill near the old fig tree, a small wooden house painted in soft white, surrounded by wildflowers. Every nail he hammered carried his heartbeat. Every board he placed carried his unspoken promise. He wanted it to be their new beginning, a peaceful home where Tusam could raise their child in warmth and laughter. Sometimes when the sun was setting, he would stand there, imagining her smile when she saw it. He rehearsed the words he would say, the ones he had once been too afraid to speak. "Tusam, I'm not the same man I was, but if you still believe in us, will you let me start over, as your husband? The thought gave him strength. He knew that life had tested them enough. Now it was time to rebuild, not from what they had lost, but from what they still had: love. One golden afternoon, the wind carried the scent of blooming wildflowers across the hills. Tusem followed a small path that Lee had asked her to walk, her heart filled with curiosity. As she turned the corner, she stopped in awe. Before her stood a small, beautiful house glowing under the sunset. Its walls were white, its windows framed with flowers, and in front of it stood Lee, holding a simple bouquet of daisies. "Lee," she whispered, her eyes trembling. He smiled, that same gentle smile that once made her fall in love. "Tusem," he said, stepping closer, his voice low but steady. "I built this for you, for us. I want this to be where our peace begins." He paused, taking her hands into his. "You've waited for me through pain, through doubt. Now I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you never have to wait again." Tusem's tears fell silently. She could barely speak as Lee knelt down, his voice breaking. "Tusem, will you marry me?" In that quiet golden light, she nodded through her tears, and for the first time, the dream of a peaceful life no longer felt distant. It had finally come true.